Ken, it's great to have you. Welcome to Building Builders Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.
Ken, maybe this would be a good time. I'll just let you introduce yourself to our listeners, and maybe you can tell a little bit about what you're doing at the AGC.
Sure. The Associated General Contractors of America is the leading national construction trade association. We have over 26,000 member companies, general contractors, specialty trade contractors of all types, and suppliers of equipment, goods, and services. They belong through a network of 89 state and local chapters that blanket the country, and collectively they do every kind of construction other than single-family home building. I've been the chief economist since 2001.
Wow, super impressive, Ken. What brought you to the construction industry? How did you end up here?
Well, I've spent my whole career working on business economics issues in Washington. So tax and economic policy analysis, advocacy, and communication in different forms. Immediately before I came to AGC, I worked for the Office of Advocacy of the U.S. Small Business Administration for 3 years. And before that, for 13 years as Vice President and Chief Economist of American Trucking Associations.
Wow, that's super impressive. I think you can have some great answers for a few questions we have here today. My first question is rising interest rates, material costs, labor costs, worker quality, the economic concerns. Five of the biggest concerns for contractors in 2024. Do you forecast any changes coming to these five concerns in the next 12 to 24 months?
Oh, yeah. I think that 2023 was generally a good year for nearly every type of construction. 2024 will be different for a number of reasons. One thing, unfortunately, is going to stay the same, and that's the hunt for qualified labor. That's been a challenge for years, and I think will be for quite a while. But I think that the economy is evolving. Now, I admit to being a chronic optimist, and last year I was right in thinking we were not heading for recession. That's still my view, although I realize there are plenty of risks out there. But I also think that we're going to be stuck with these relatively high interest rates for longer than most people expect. And that's definitely put a damper on single-family home buying and also on developers, whether they're putting up multifamily, office, warehouse. All of those are being hit by a squeeze between tighter financing, higher financing costs and tighter availability of credit on the one side, and then flat or declining rents in many markets. So those things are definitely going to change. I think there are also questions about how strong demand will be this year for retail and for lodging construction. But on the infrastructure and manufacturing, data centers, those still look very strong.
Ken, I should clarify quickly. We have many listeners in Canada and the U.S. I'm assuming that your responses and answers are specific to the U.S.
That's right. I know that many Canadian contractors pay a lot of attention to the U.S. market, and I try to follow what's going on in Canada, but I can't claim to have any expertise about construction there.
Ken, how should contractors manage their businesses when so many concerns are outside of their control?
Well, that's always a challenge, not just for construction, but I guess for pretty much any industry. I think what we've seen over the past 4 years, where there have been so many shocks to the system of the pandemic shutting things down overnight, literally, and suddenly workers not being allowed on site, or many becoming ill or having to take care of someone who's ill, but also the supply chain bottlenecks and the record high prices that we saw for lumber and steel, much more frequent and steeper price increases than ever before for many things that used to have very predictable and long lead time price increases. All of those really shook up the economy, shook up the industry from 2020 to 2022. Fortunately, those problems, I won't say they went away, but they certainly got better for the most part in 2023. And I don't think we'll see a recurrence this year, but I think the lessons that contractors learned were to improve communication, if possible, with owners and suppliers and subcontractors, try to make the workplace as inviting and rewarding as possible for workers at a time when you're competing with other industries that can now offer work from home or hybrid positions, flexible hours, things that contractors still can't offer for on-site construction jobs. Investigate seriously ways of reducing the amount of workers you need on-site or the skill level so that the workers that you do find can be productive at an earlier stage. And that also means looking at the rapid developments in software, in hardware, whether it's for offsite production or robotics and other things on the site. And of course, try to keep up with the rapid changes in AI, artificial intelligence, particularly so-called generative artificial intelligence. That's one that I think is really evolving every day, and construction firms are still trying to figure out how they can make use of it.
That's so interesting that you say that. I mean, things are moving so fast in the AI world, but even outside of that, I think that I'm hearing from you that contractors should be doing their best to take this opportunity to double down and invest in R&D, even in sort of challenging times. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes. Now, it really depends what market you're trying to serve. Certainly, there's still a lot of projects that can be done the way they were several years ago, assuming you can get the materials and get the labor to do them. But I think in order to expand your reach and to keep up with the rapidly changing demands of customers, it's better to be aware of what the new possibilities are. I'm not saying everybody has to rush out and become an expert in AI. I'm certainly not one, but it's going to keep evolving and affecting construction in many ways.
I wanted to ask you, so for the most part, it looks like most sectors of the construction industry are going to see growth. The ones that are expected to decrease, as you said, lodging, retail, and private office. Is there hope for those sectors to recover post-COVID? What does recovery look like? And is there a timeline for this recovery?
I think it's most difficult for the office sector that companies have largely failed to bring workers back full time, all workers. We're seeing reports on office occupancy stuck around 50%, and that's on the good days. On Fridays and Mondays, it may look like the office has been abandoned completely. And I'm not sure if that is going to change. Obviously, a company that has workers in only 3 days a week, they still need the office space for those workers, although they may not have every worker in on those days. So I do think that as leases expire, more firms are going to be moving to smaller spaces and putting more space on the market for sublease, or the landlords trying to find a new tenant. So that puts tremendous downward pressure on rents, and therefore banks are even less likely to want to lend money for office projects unless they can see that it's been pre-leased and that the developer is willing to put in much more equity than they were able to or needed to previously. So all of those things suggest that the office market will remain pretty dismal for a while. Now, multifamily housing is another one that I think is under quite a bit of stress. For several months, the Census Bureau has been reporting that the number of multifamily units under construction is at near record levels, but the number of starts and permits has been dropping at a year-over-year rate of 20 or 30%. So once these projects that are still being worked on get finished, I think we'll see a big drop-off in multifamily starts. But that doesn't mean that demand for housing has gone away. In fact, we've been underbuilding new housing, whether multi or single family for quite a while. So I think the downturn in multifamily may be shorter. It'll just take a while to absorb the housing that will be coming on stream this year and next. So that market, it's going to be spotty. And indeed, the office market, I'm not saying nobody will build an office. Probably people will be trying to put in new, smaller offices closer to where people live. So the downtowns, I think they have a huge challenge, but suburban areas, smaller cities, or even rural areas that some people have moved to in the last 4 years, they may get some smaller office projects. You also mentioned lodging. That's one that has really done well in the last couple of years. Of course, it took a tremendous hit in the first year of the pandemic when people weren't willing to travel. Businesses were shut down. International travel was at a standstill. Now both leisure and business travel have come back strongly. International travelers to the U.S., they're also coming in greater numbers. So the lodging industry has been investing more. They're kind of holding their breath to see if those trends of going back to bigger vacation spending and further increases in business travel will continue. But I think that market has a better chance of being positive in 2024 or certainly by 2025. So I think lodging looks positive. One other that I'm concerned about, though, is warehouse construction. That was a huge growth industry as companies encountered the supply chain challenges, as people ordered directly from warehouses rather than going into stores. That's all changed. That now delivery times have gotten back to normal for most items, at least consumer items. And so big retailers are saying, well, we don't need as much in storage. We can get it just in time. We don't need to store it just in case. And so I think nationally, warehouse construction will be declining in 2024. But again, there will be exceptions. We've seen a big pickup in traffic to ports like Charleston and Savannah. We also know that these giant manufacturing plants, whether it's a fabrication plant for chips, so-called fabs, or big automotive and battery plants, that they need suppliers and they need warehouse space near them. So where one of those is going up, I would expect more warehouse. And then finally, cold storage or temperature-controlled storage still appears to be a growth area.
Interesting. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act starting to ramp up spending, what does that mean for contractors? I saw 63% of people don't expect change or don't know how it's expected to change their business. Is this additional spending something they should be aware of at a high level?
Well, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act was signed in November of 2021, and it does promise a record amount of money for highways and bridges and big increases for things like water, sewer, rail, and new investments in broadband internet and other types of construction, for instance, build out of battery charging stations. But it's taken a long time to get that money actually awarded in terms of contracts. The White House and the executive branch agencies have been rolling out announcements pretty much every week for over 2 years. But there's still a lot of steps to go through once the administration says X billion dollars is going to be available in this broad category, to pin that down to specific projects that a local agency or a state agency has to bid for, and then do the design and environmental reviews and public comment period, and then actually have a bid letting. That takes a very long time in many cases. So we have seen good growth in water and wastewater projects, partly because the mechanism was already in place. The state state revolving funds, but also there have been discretionary grants to address specific problems like lead pipes and other water treatment issues. Lately, broadband for underserved communities seems to be getting a big boost, and some gigantic rail projects are moving ahead, whether it's the Frederick Douglass Tunnel under Baltimore or the Gateway Tunnel project connecting New York and New Jersey, but also some smaller things, improvements to train stations and some lines. So I think those categories are going ahead. But the biggest money, highway and bridge construction, that has been held up by uncertainty over the applicability or the waiver process for Build America, Buy America. That's an act within the broader law that says that materials and equipment used, or materials and manufactured products used on federally aided projects have to be U.S. sourced. And the contractor, they may know they're buying from a U.S. producer, but don't know what all goes into that. So that's been a problem. There are also new rules about apprenticeships that are a problem in areas where there haven't been union organized apprenticeship programs, and a number of other regulatory issues. I do think that we'll see a pickup in infrastructure projects this year that will continue, but those certainly come with risk of running afoul of one of the many strings attached to them. So contractors should approach with caution, but if they feel experienced in this area, expect a lot more projects.
There's also the CHIPS Act that's bringing more manufacturing back to America. What has been the impact on the industry from this policy?
Well, again, it's slower than a lot of people expected. This act was finally passed in August of 2022 after years of debate and anticipation. It had bipartisan support, unlike the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so it looked as if a lot of federal money, grants, and loan guarantees, tax credits would be going to advanced manufacturing projects. But again, it was novel, and agencies had to get familiar with what types of projects they should consider awarding. So just in February, we got the first major award, $1.5 billion, to a company called Global Foundries doing a plant north of Albany. But the expectation is that there will be a lot more money being awarded to semiconductor fabrication plants, fabs, and other advanced manufacturing projects over the next year or two. Certainly, there have been many companies already applying for that money.
Just on Ken, a slightly different note, one of the largest concerns for contractors is headcount and finding enough skilled talent. Your 2023 report suggests that 69% of contractors plan to increase headcount by 55%, but 55% say it will be harder to hire. 77% said they are having a hard time already. Can you explain a little bit more about why this is?
Sure. First, let me comment on those percentages you just cited. They come from a survey that AGC does every November and December. This year, we got over 1,400 responses. And indeed, 69% of the firms said that they do expect to increase their headcount, but they recognize that it's not easy. As you said, 55% of them said that it will be as hard or harder than it was last year. Now, we get other evidence about how hard this situation is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics from a couple of different sources. First, on the first business day of each month, they report on a number of jobs or total employment in different industries. And the construction industry has actually been adding workers at a faster clip than the overall economy has. So that's the good news. The bad news comes from another survey called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. And for the past couple of years, the number of job openings at the end of each month has exceeded the number of people hired during the entire month. And that suggests the industry wanted to bring on board more than twice as many people as it was able to find. So yes, construction is adding workers, but not at the rate they need to or want to. And so I think that's going to put upward pressure on wages, both to attract those workers, but also to compete with the industries that can now offer more flexible hours or working conditions than construction can. For the past few years, more than 2 years now, construction wages, as again measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a series called Average Hourly Earnings for Production and Non-Supervisory Employees, a long way of describing the average hourly wage for the craft workers and office workers who aren't supervisors. That's been going up at a rate of 5 to 6%. And I think that's going to have to continue this year or even go as high as 7%. Certainly a lot of union contracts that were signed at 2 or 3% increases back before the beginning of the pandemic. Now they have been renegotiated and they're looking at 4 or 5% increases, maybe even more. So that's going to put some upward pressure, not just on the union wage rate, but wherever there are non-union contractors competing to get those workers.
How do you think companies should be thinking about retaining their talent? Not every company can increase rates, provide more benefits, and give out bonuses.
Well, that's certainly always a challenge. It's become a greater challenge, partly for the reasons I just mentioned, but also the aging of the workforce, I think, hits construction more than it does some other industries. I can think of some economists who could still be working in their 70s, but you don't find people out and doing the heavy physical labor in construction that late. So people do tend to leave construction at an earlier age than they do some other industries. And so finding replacements becomes even more challenging or more urgent for construction than it does for those other sectors. Contractors, of course, pay is usually the number one consideration, but anything that you can do to make working conditions more attractive. Last year, I did a press conference in front of a huge new hospital tower in Columbus, Ohio, and the contractors pointed out that they were able to offer parking in an adjacent building and a fully functioning cafeteria. Much better than having to park your truck out by the roadside and then go to a weenie wagon to get your lunch and stand around outside. So those things can make a difference. Obviously, childcare can also be an important issue. And to the extent you can offer any flexibility about working hours starting or ending, or a chance to leave during the day. Those things can also make a real difference as to whether someone can take a job, particularly in this era where we do have a lot of people who are dealing with so-called long COVID. COVID itself is causing abrupt calls from schools to come get your kid, or other situations, or forcing people to stay home to take care of someone who has it. But again, it's something that companies have to recognize as a reality, and it's probably not going to go away.
Great advice. How might immigration policies in the USA impact the labor shortage?
Oh, that's been such a frustration. I've been with AGC for 22 years, and the association has been working with other employers to try to convince now several administrations to take a more realistic attitude toward allowing employers who can demonstrate that they can't find the workers they need for particular tasks to bring them in on a expedited time frame, instead of having to go through a process where you wait several months to get approval, and by then you may have missed the construction season, or you may have to go through it all over again just a few months later. But we haven't been able to crack that nut in terms of getting the two sides in Congress to agree on what's appropriate. So Immigration historically has always been a bigger source of labor for construction than it has for other sectors, but it's become even more challenging since the nature of the immigration has changed from generally men with some kind of experience already looking for work for a few months and then perhaps going back to their countries. Now it's much more a matter of families or even unaccompanied minors. So the people who are coming to the border may not be as suitable for construction, even if they can get in.
Ken, earlier on, I heard you talking about the economic recovery and, some optimism there. Your report suggests that there's still some risk of it happening. Does that threat of recession impact the subcontractors more or large GCs, and what can owners do to prepare?
Well, I think I've been pleasantly surprised over the past 4 years at how viable subcontractors have remained. And I would give a lot of credit to the pandemic relief that Congress passed in 20 and 21 that allowed for basically loans that were turned into tax credits for keeping people on the payroll and other kinds of relief that meant that companies didn't have to shut down for long periods, which would have been permanent for many subcontractors. But we are in a period now where that money has expired, where people have generally been running up bigger charges on their credit, whether it's individuals for personal credit or businesses that operate at the individual level. So definitely, I think that the level of risk for GCs has risen, that subcontractors may be failing. Historically, the message I was always told was that subcontractors tend to fail when business is picking up. When it's tough times, they know how to get through those. But when things start to get good, they get over their skis and start taking on more work than they have cash flow for or have the workers to accomplish. I haven't heard those stories much in the last 4 years, but now where the hunt for labor is so intense, where wages are going up so much, we may run into that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've heard similar things. With the election coming up this year, how is it expected to impact the industry? And is there anything that people should be looking out for depending on who wins?
Oh, I think that the election year notion doesn't really make a difference, or let's say the reality of it being an election year doesn't make a lot of difference in how much construction is out there on offer. Really, every year is election year. Voters may not go to the polls, but certainly the politicians have their eye on that next election. So the difference comes in who's sitting in the White House. And we've seen this for a dozen years or longer now, swings back and forth in the rules governing land use, air quality, the move toward greener building and building materials, the hours of the wage and hour rules, or the degree to which unions are favored or held at bay. All of those things very much depend on who's president and who's running the agencies that set those rules. And then control of Congress will also matter a lot in 2025, as many of the provisions from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 expire, come up for renewal. But I think, first of all, it's way too early for me to tell who's going to control the White House, the Senate, or the House. They're all very much in play. And then second, as we've seen in the very closely divided House, it only takes a few members who object to what the leadership in their party is saying to hold things up. So I guess my biggest concern politically right now is whether we'll even have a functioning budget for agencies through the rest of the fiscal year, and then what will happen beyond.
Ken, I have one more question for you. We always ask our visitors, what's your favorite piece of equipment?
Well, even though I've been with AGC for 22 years, I hardly ever get out to a job site, and I certainly never get close to equipment, and that's a good thing to keep me away from it. So I'm going to duck that one.
Fair enough, Ken. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure having you on here and hearing your insights. Thank you for joining. Is there a way that our listeners can connect with you?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to hear from anyone. Just write to me at ken.simonson, SIMONSON, at agc.org. I'd be glad to send them my Data Digest. That's a weekly summary of economic news relevant to construction. And I also regularly update a PowerPoint that covers many of the things that we talked about today. So I hope to hear from your listeners.
That's awesome. Thanks for offering that up, Ken. Thanks again for joining us. Hope you have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you.